There comes a moment in every relationship or connection when the energy shifts. What once felt magnetic, effortless, and full of spark begins to feel uncertain. The laughter isn't as frequent, the conversations aren't as deep, and the attention you once received begins to fade. It's subtle at first, but then it grows louder. Missed calls, shorter replies, distant behavior. That shift strikes deeply because it touches on one of the most human fears, losing significance in someone else's life. Most men respond to this shift the wrong way. They panic. They think the only solution is to do more texting, more calling, more asking for reassurance. They try to hold on by force, but the harder they grip, the faster the connection slips away. Desperation becomes the mask they wear, and they do not realize that desperation is the very force that pushes interest even further out of reach. What begins as an attempt to save the relationship turns into an act of self-sabotage. The harsh truth is this: no amount of begging, pleading, or convincing can reignite genuine interest. Attraction does not respond to pressure, it responds to power. And power does not come from chasing, it comes from pulling back, from self-control, from discipline. When a man begs, he sends a silent signal that says, "I am not enough as I am. I need you to validate me." That message crushes respect and kills desire. A woman cannot remain attracted to a man who abandons his strength to seek constant approval. But here lies the paradox. Interest can be regained, not through desperation, but through transformation. The same way that interest was built in the beginning can be built again, but it requires an entirely different approach. Instead of looking outward for validation, the focus must return inward. Instead of trying to hold on tighter, the grip must loosen. Instead of flooding her with words, silence and presence must do the talking. The reality is that women are not drawn to men because of how much attention they give. They are drawn to the energy, confidence, and purpose those men carry. When a man radiates direction, when he is anchored in who he is, when he lives by standards rather than desperation, he naturally becomes magnetic. Interest returns because respect returns. And respect is the soil where attraction grows. Think about it. When the connection was at its strongest, it wasn't because of constant reassurance or desperate effort. It was because there was a natural rhythm, a balance of energy, and a sense of independence that made the connection exciting. Attraction lives in space, in polarity, in the dance between closeness and distance. The moment one person tries to erase that balance by forcing constant attention, attraction suffocates. This is why the very first step in regaining a woman's interest is not about her at all. It's about shifting the mindset, the posture, and the presence of the man himself. It's about understanding that begging does not equal love, that chasing does not equal care, and that persistence does not equal strength. True strength lies in restraint, in the ability to hold back when every impulse says to chase. It lies in the decision to rise above fear and rebuild value from within. The harsh truth is that the situation cannot be fixed by doing more of what already failed. Begging never works. Desperation never works. Overcompensating never works. But what does work is stepping back, regaining composure, and remembering the foundation of attraction, self-respect. When self-respect is present, everything changes. Communication changes, energy changes, and the way she perceives you changes. Suddenly, you are no longer the man scrambling to keep her attention. You are the man she feels compelled to notice again. This is where the journey begins. Regaining interest is not a game, it is not manipulation, and it is not about tricking someone into coming back. It is about becoming the version of yourself that naturally commands respect, naturally inspires admiration, and naturally creates attraction. That version does not beg. That version does not chase. That version stands tall, even when interest fades, because he understands that his worth is not determined by someone else's validation. The choice then is clear. A man can stay trapped in the cycle of desperation, trying to win back interest through weakness, or he can embrace the path of strength and transformation. The second path may be harder, but it is the only path that works. And it all begins with understanding this one powerful truth. Begging kills attraction, but strength revives it. Begging is often disguised as love, as care, or as effort. But beneath the surface, it is nothing more than fear in action. Fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of no longer being chosen. This fear twists the natural flow of attraction into something forced and unnatural. And the more a man tries to force interest through begging, the faster it collapses. Begging is not strength, it is weakness. It is not leadership, it is submission. It sends one undeniable message: My value depends on your attention. That message destroys the very foundation of attraction, because attraction thrives on strength, independence, and mystery. When a man begins to beg, he willingly hands over all of his power. He becomes predictable, controllable, and uninspiring. No woman feels drawn to a man who cannot stand on his own. What makes this trap even more dangerous is that it feels like the right thing in the moment. When someone begins to pull away, panic sets in. And in that panic, the mind whispers lies. If I just call one more time, she'll see I care. If I just explain how much she means to me, she'll come back. If I just show more effort, she'll notice. When every extra text, every unnecessary explanation, every plea for reassurance is not building a bridge back to her, it's tearing it down. Consider the psychology of attraction. People are not drawn to what is always available, always predictable, always desperate to please. People are drawn to what carries weight, what holds boundaries, what values itself enough not to beg for attention. This is why begging is so toxic to attraction. It signals that self-value is missing. And when self-value is missing, interest dies. Think about it. In the early stages of connection, there was no begging, there was no pleading, there was a natural rhythm, a flow that made her curious, excited, and drawn in. She admired the confidence, the ease, the self-assured presence. But the moment begging enters, all of that disappears. Instead of strength, she sees weakness. Instead of calm certainty, she sees frantic desperation. Instead of a man in control of his emotions, she sees someone controlled by fear. And once respect is lost, attraction follows. This is why so many men lose a woman's interest without even realizing what went wrong. They assume they weren't giving enough attention, when in reality they were giving too much access, too much explanation, too much energy without balance. They forget that interest is not maintained by constant chasing, but by value, by presence, and by strength. The trap of begging is more than just words, it's energy. Even silence can carry begging energy if the mindset is desperate. For example, when a man waits anxiously by his phone, hoping for a reply, even if he says nothing, the energy of desperation leaks into every interaction. It can be felt, it can be sensed, and it cannot be hidden. Women are highly intuitive when it comes to energy, and they can immediately detect when a man has shifted from confident presence to desperate pursuit. Escaping this trap requires awareness. It requires the courage to step back and admit, this is not strength, this is not attraction, this is fear. Once that realization is made, the pattern can be broken. The man must stop equating love with begging and stop confusing effort with weakness. Genuine effort is not about pleading for attention. It's about becoming so strong, so focused, and so aligned with purpose that interest naturally flows back. The truth is this: begging never wins respect, and without respect, interest cannot survive. Respect is earned through boundaries, through composure, and through silence when necessary. Respect is maintained when a man values himself enough not to trade his dignity for temporary reassurance. And respect is what makes her look at him with renewed interest. Every time the urge to beg arises, there is an opportunity to pause, to breathe, and to remind oneself of value, to choose strength over desperation, composure over panic, and silence over pleading. That choice may not give immediate results, but it plants the seed of respect, the only soil where true attraction grows again. The trap of begging has destroyed countless connections, not because the love was gone, but because the strength was gone. And without strength, love cannot stand. Breaking free from this trap is the first step toward regaining balance. And balance is the foundation of renewed interest. The first and most powerful step in regaining a woman's interest is not about her at all. It is about reclaiming presence. Presence is not just about being physically there. It is about the energy carried, the aura projected, the silent strength that speaks louder than words. When interest fades, it often happens because presence has been diluted. Too much attention, too much neediness, too much chasing causes a man to lose the very magnetism that drew her in at the start. To shift this dynamic, the focus must return inward. Reclaiming presence begins with rediscovering self-respect. When self-respect is intact, it radiates effortlessly. It can be seen in the way a man walks, the way he carries himself, the way he speaks. It is not arrogance, it is not loudness, it is quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need constant validation. A woman feels this difference immediately because confidence creates polarity. It separates a man from the crowd of desperate chasers and positions him as someone who lives by his own standards. One of the strongest ways to rebuild presence is through self-improvement. Physical fitness, mental clarity, emotional stability, and spiritual grounding all contribute to the energy a man radiates. A man who takes care of his body demonstrates discipline. A man who feeds his mind demonstrates vision. A man who manages his emotions demonstrates strength. And a man who grounds himself spiritually demonstrates depth. Each of these qualities makes presence undeniable, because presence is not a performance, it is a reflection of inner alignment. Women are drawn to men who have their own mission. A man with purpose is not easily shaken, nor is he easily distracted. He moves forward with conviction, and that conviction creates a gravitational pull. She cannot help but notice when his life is moving in a direction with or without her. This is the paradox. When she sees that his world does not orbit around her, her curiosity grows. She begins to wonder what occupies his mind, what drives him, what makes him so fulfilled without needing her constant attention. That curiosity is the spark of renewed interest. Reclaiming presence also requires silence and restraint. Too often, men give away their presence by over-explaining, over-apologizing, or over-communicating. But real presence doesn't chase approval. It commands respect through composure. When words are used sparingly, they carry more weight. When actions align with strength, they speak volumes. Presence is not about saying more, it is about needing to say less. Another key to presence is independence. A man who depends on someone else for emotional survival loses all magnetism, but a man who enjoys solitude, who thrives in his own company, and who continues to grow even when alone, builds an aura of strength. Independence is not about isolation, it is about self-sufficiency. It communicates, I am whole on my own and I choose who I share my energy with. That kind of presence makes a woman stop and reevaluate, because it reminds her of why she was drawn to him in the first place. Reclaiming presence also means rebuilding standards. A man who allows disrespect, inconsistency, or neglect to continue without consequence weakens his presence. But a man who calmly enforces boundaries shows that he values himself. Boundaries are not walls, they are filters. They show that access to his time, his energy, and his love must be earned. Presence becomes magnetic when it is paired with standards, because standards reflect self-worth. This step requires patience. Rebuilding presence does not happen overnight. It requires consistency, showing up every day for personal growth, every day for discipline, every day for purpose. But over time, this presence becomes impossible to ignore. She will notice the shift, not because he demanded her attention, but because his energy changed. She will sense the difference between the man who once begged for her approval and the man who now radiates self-respect and strength. Presence is powerful because it makes a woman feel something she cannot fully explain. She may not even understand why her interest grows again, but she feels it. She feels the difference between weakness and strength, between desperation and composure, between a man who chases and a man who leads himself. That is the silent transformation that reignites attraction. Reclaiming presence is the foundation of the journey. Without it, every other step fails. But with it, every other step becomes easier. Once presence is re-established, the dynamic shifts in your favor, and the magnetic energy that was once lost begins to return. This is the first true move toward regaining her interest, becoming the man who no longer needs to beg, because his very presence is enough. The second step in regaining a woman's interest is learning to withdraw energy. This may sound counterintuitive, because the instinct during distance is to give more, to try harder, to prove worth through constant effort. But attraction does not return when energy is overextended. It returns when energy is withheld, when space is created, and when curiosity is allowed to breathe. Human nature is wired to value what is scarce, what is always available, always predictable, always seeking attention, quickly loses its appeal. When a man pours endless energy into someone who is pulling away, he makes himself common, ordinary, and easy to dismiss. But when he withdraws that energy, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, he changes the dynamic instantly. Scarcity begins to rebuild value. She notices what is no longer there, and in that noticing, she begins to feel the absence. Withdrawing energy is not about punishment. It is not about coldness or cruelty. It is about balance. Relationships thrive on polarity, on the natural dance between closeness and distance. When closeness is overdone, suffocation occurs. When distance is overdone, disconnection occurs. The key is controlled distance, a deliberate decision to stop overgiving and start recentering energy on self. This creates enough space for attraction to breathe again. One of the most effective Ways to withdraw energy is to stop over-communicating. Many men make the mistake of flooding a woman with messages when she grows distant. They think persistence shows care, but in reality it shows insecurity. The more he reaches, the more she pulls back because her interest is suffocated under constant pressure. Withdrawing energy means resisting the urge to over-explain, to double-text, to chase after responses. Silence, when delivered with confidence, becomes louder than words. Another way to withdraw energy is to redirect it. Energy must flow somewhere, and if it is not being invested into her, it should be invested into personal growth. Physical training, skill development, building a career, or pursuing passions all serve to redirect energy into meaningful pursuits. This not only strengthens the man, but also amplifies his magnetism. A woman is far more intrigued by a man who pours his energy into becoming greater than into constantly seeking her attention. Withdrawing energy also tests alignment. If interest was only being maintained because one person was overextending, then the absence of that energy reveals the truth. If she no longer invests anything in return, it confirms the imbalance. But often, when energy is withdrawn, something interesting happens. She begins to step forward. She notices the silence, she feels the gap, and she starts to question what shifted. That curiosity is the seed of renewed interest. Discipline is essential in this step. The urge to break silence, to explain, to check in just once, can be overwhelming. But every time that urge is resisted, strength is built. This discipline sends a powerful message: my energy is valuable. My attention is not given without balance. That message transforms the perception of the man from someone chasing to someone choosing. And a man who chooses instead of begs becomes magnetic again. It's important to understand that withdrawing energy is not about playing games. Games are manipulative and rooted in insecurity. Withdrawing energy is about truth. It is about refusing to invest in places where respect and reciprocity are absent. It is about protecting self-worth and refusing to pour into someone who does not meet the same effort. When done with authenticity, this step is not manipulation, it is restoration. The result of this withdrawal is powerful. She may start to wonder, why is he not chasing anymore? Why does he seem so composed? Has he moved on? What is he focused on now? Those questions spark curiosity, and curiosity fuels attraction. Even if she does not show it openly, the silence forces her to reevaluate the value of what was lost. In many cases, the very energy she once took for granted becomes the energy she now seeks again. Withdrawing energy is about more than regaining her interest. It is about regaining control over self. It shifts the power dynamic back to balance, it reestablishes respect, and it protects dignity. A man who masters this step communicates without words that he is not afraid of loss, and nothing is more attractive than someone who is willing to walk away if respect is absent. This step is difficult, but it is necessary. It requires faith in the process, patience with the silence, and strength to resist weakness. But in the end, withdrawing energy is what allows space for interest to return, not because it was demanded, but because it was earned through presence, restraint, and self-respect. The final step in regaining a woman's interest is raising standards. Without standards, a man loses direction. Without standards, he tolerates disrespect, inconsistency, and behavior that chips away at his value. And when value is lost, attraction disappears. But when standards are clearly defined and firmly upheld, they restore respect, and respect is the very foundation of renewed interest. Standards are not rules forced on others, they are boundaries that protect self-worth. They say, this is what I accept, and this is what I will not accept. A man without standards bends to whatever keeps someone around, even if it means sacrificing his dignity. He accepts late replies, cancelled commitments, poor treatment, and neglect, all in the hope of preserving a connection. But what he doesn't realize is that every time he lowers his standards, he lowers her respect for him. And when respect is gone, attraction cannot survive. Redefining standards means refusing to settle for less than what aligns with self-respect. It means valuing consistency, honesty, and mutual effort, not as optional luxuries, but as non-negotiables. When a man sets this tone, he communicates that his energy is precious, his time is valuable, and his love is meaningful. This does not make him controlling, it makes him strong. A man who knows his standards does not need to beg for respect, because respect becomes the natural response to his presence. One of the greatest mistakes men make is thinking that lowering standards will save a relationship. They believe that if they accept more and expect less, she will stay. But in reality, the opposite happens. Lowering standards makes her lose faith in his strength. She begins to view him not as a leader, but as someone easily swayed, someone willing to compromise self-respect for temporary attention. Interest fades not because he was too demanding, but because he wasn't demanding enough, of himself first and of her second. Redefining standards also means demanding more from oneself. It's not only about what is expected from her, but also about what is expected from within. A man must set the standard for his own behavior, his own discipline, his own vision. It cannot expect respect if he does not live in a way that commands it. Standards are not spoken, they are demonstrated. They are seen in consistency, in discipline, and in the refusal to compromise on values. When standards are clear, energy shifts. Suddenly, her behavior begins to adjust. She realizes that she cannot treat him casually without consequence. She recognizes that he is not afraid to walk away if his boundaries are crossed. And in that recognition, interest is reborn. Why? Because attraction thrives in respect. A man who is respected is a man who is desired. A man who is respected is a man who cannot be ignored. It is also important to understand that redefining standards does not mean becoming rigid or cold. It is not about demanding perfection. It is about ensuring that the energy exchanged is balanced and healthy. It is about requiring honesty, communication, and consistency not through ultimatums, but through quiet firmness. A man with standards does not need to shout them, he lives them, and his actions make them clear. At first, raising standards may create resistance. She may push back, test boundaries, or pull away. But this is part of the process. Attraction often grows when strength is tested and proven. When she sees that he is unwavering, that he does not compromise dignity for attention, her perception shifts. She begins to see him differently, not as the desperate man who once begged, but as the strong man who commands respect. The most powerful part of redefining standards is the message it sends. I choose myself first. That message transforms everything. It shows that his identity is not tied to her approval, that his worth is not determined by her attention, and that his future is not dependent on her presence. Ironically, this independence is what makes her interest return. When she sees that he does not need her, she begins to want him again. Redefining standards is not about regaining control over her. It is about regaining control over self. It restores balance, it reestablishes respect, and it reignites attraction. Once this step is complete, the dynamic changes permanently. He no longer has to beg, chase, or prove his value, because his standards make his value undeniable. Absence has a power that presence sometimes cannot achieve. When a man withdraws, when his energy is no longer freely available, when his constant presence is replaced with disciplined distance, something remarkable happens. He becomes noticeable again. What was once taken for granted is now missed. What was once overlooked is now remembered. Absence, when used with strength and self-respect, is not emptiness, it is influence. Attraction thrives on polarity. It is the push and pull, the closeness and the distance, the mystery and the revelation that keep it alive. When there is only constant presence, the polarity disappears. When there is no space, curiosity dies. That is why absence is so powerful. It reintroduces space, it reawakens curiosity, and it forces reflection. When a man is always available, he risks being seen as ordinary. His messages are expected, his calls are routine, his presence predictable. Predictability breeds boredom. But when he steps back and withdraws, predictability breaks. Suddenly she begins to notice what is no longer there. The good morning texts, the late night conversations, the constant check-ins, all the things she once dismissed as routine now echo in their absence. And in that echo, she feels the difference. Absence also creates respect. A man who is willing to step back demonstrates that he does not fear loss. He shows that his world does not collapse without her constant validation. This quiet strength is magnetic, because it signals independence. It says, "Without words, I am whole on my own, and I will not trade my dignity for attention." That message commands far more respect than begging ever could. The beauty of absence is that it gives perspective. People often fail to recognize value when it is always in front of them. But the moment it is gone, the mind begins to reflect. Memories resurface. Comparisons are made. She begins to remember the qualities she once admired, the moments that mattered, the presence that felt secure. The distance forces her to evaluate, not because he demanded her attention, but because he removed it. Absence also shifts energy back to the man. The focus is no longer on chasing, convincing, or over-explaining. It is on growth, purpose, and self-respect. Time once wasted on desperation is redirected into personal elevation. And as that growth happens, presence transforms. If and when she returns, she does not find the same man she left behind. She finds a stronger, more grounded, more magnetic version. That transformation makes the absence even more powerful, because it reveals progress. But absence must be intentional. It is not silence rooted in bitterness. It is not withdrawal born from anger. It is not the cold shoulder used as a weapon. Those approaches are manipulative, and manipulation never builds respect. True absence comes from composure, from the decision to step back with dignity, from the understanding that constant availability is not a requirement for love. It is silence delivered with self-respect, not resentment. The fear many men have is that absence will push her away forever. But the truth is the opposite. If her interest is meant to return, absence creates the space for it to grow. If her interest is gone permanently, absence reveals that truth quickly, saving wasted energy. Either way, absence protects the man from losing more of himself while chasing someone who may not value him. It is a filter, a test, and a declaration of strength. Absence also magnifies presence when it does return. Just as a pause makes music more powerful, distance makes connection more meaningful. When she experiences the silence, she is more likely to appreciate the moments when he chooses to engage again. His words carry more weight, his time feels more valuable, his presence becomes more precious. This shift reignites attraction, not because he forced it, but because he allowed her to feel the contrast. At its core, the power of absence lies in this: what is rare is respected, what is scarce is valued, what is disciplined is desired. By stepping back, by holding space, by resisting the urge to overextend, a man makes his presence worth something again. He transforms from the man who begged for attention into the man whose attention must be earned. And in that transformation, interest begins to return. Regaining a woman's interest is not about tricks, manipulation, or rehearsed strategies. It is about becoming magnetic again. Magnetism is not something that can be faked. It is not about pretending to be confident or acting like someone who has it all together. True magnetism comes from alignment with purpose, alignment with self-respect, alignment with strength. When these qualities come together, a man naturally draws people in, without effort and without desperation. Magnetism begins within. A man who knows who he is, what he values, and where he is going carries an energy that cannot be ignored. He does not need to demand attention, because his very presence commands it. People notice his composure, his discipline, his focus. Women in particular are drawn to this energy because it signals safety, direction, and leadership. A man who leads himself well will always attract interest, because leadership is one of the most magnetic qualities he can display. But becoming magnetic again requires transformation. It requires leaving behind the patterns that killed attraction in the first place: begging, over-explaining, constant availability, and lack of standards. Those patterns create repulsion, not attraction. The man who once chased must now rebuild himself into the man who chooses. The man who once sought validation must now validate himself. The man who once lived for her approval must now live for his mission. Magnetism is built in small disciplines. Waking up early, training the body, sharpening the mind, creating structure, pursuing goals. These habits create energy. That energy is felt even before a word is spoken. A man who is disciplined radiates strength, and strength is always attractive. On the other hand, a man who neglects himself radiates weakness, and weakness never inspires desire. The way he treats himself is the blueprint for how others will treat him. Another key to becoming magnetic is emotional control. Women lose interest when a man cannot control his emotions, when he reacts impulsively, panics at distance, or lashes out in fear. But when he controls himself, when he remains calm under pressure, when he handles silence with composure, his energy becomes magnetic. Emotional control communicates maturity. It says, "I am steady, I am unshaken, I will not collapse under pressure." That steadiness is irresistible because it creates safety. Mystery also plays a role in magnetism. What is fully predictable becomes boring. But what carries depth, what holds back just enough to spark curiosity, becomes fascinating. A man does not need to reveal everything about himself at once. He does not need to constantly explain his every move or emotion. By keeping parts of his world private, by letting his actions reveal more than his words, he becomes intriguing again. And intrigue is one of the most powerful fuels for renewed attraction. Becoming magnetic again also requires self-sufficiency. A man who needs someone else to complete him radiates lack, but a man who is complete on his own radiates abundance. This does not mean he does not want her presence. It means he does not need it to define his worth. That difference shifts the dynamic entirely. Needing chases people away, while choosing draws them in. A man who is whole on his own is always more desirable than a man who is dependent on external validation. It is also important to understand that magnetism is not loud. It does not come from showing off, bragging, or trying to impress. In fact, the more a man tries to prove himself, the less magnetic he becomes. True magnetism is quiet confidence. It is the calm certainty in his voice, the discipline in his habits, the consistency in his actions. It is the way he carries himself in silence, not the words he shouts to gain approval. When magnetism is rebuilt, interest naturally follows. She begins to notice the change without him needing to announce it. She sees a man who is focused, disciplined, calm, and purposeful. She senses a man who values himself enough not to beg for attention. She feels the difference in his presence, the strength, the restraint, the confidence. And in that feeling, her curiosity returns. Curiosity leads to attraction, and attraction leads to interest. Becoming magnetic again is not about her, it is about him. It is about choosing growth over desperation, purpose over panic, strength over weakness. And when that transformation is real, interest is no longer something to chase. It is something that naturally gravitates back. Magnetism makes begging unnecessary because attraction flows to the man who commands it without asking. Every word spoken, every principle revealed, leads to one undeniable truth. The power to regain a woman's interest lies not in her hands, but in yours. The choice has always been yours. You can continue down the path of desperation, chasing, pleading, explaining, lowering your value in hopes of clinging to her attention. Or you can choose the higher path, the path of discipline, strength, and transformation, the path that turns you from someone who seeks approval into someone who commands respect. The question is simple: which man will you be? The man who begs is forgotten. The man who compromises his dignity for validation is overlooked. The man who chases endlessly without pause loses not only her interest but also himself. Yet the man who steps into strength, who reclaims presence, who withdraws energy with composure, and who raises his standards, this is the man who reignites attraction. This is the man who inspires curiosity. This is the man who does not need to beg because he has already become magnetic. Life rewards the disciplined, not the desperate. Respect is given to those who respect themselves first. Love flows most strongly toward those who are already whole. You must decide whether you will keep pouring energy into a strategy that has failed countless men before you, or whether you will rise into a version of yourself that no woman can ignore. This choice extends beyond relationships. It defines your entire existence. Every area of life responds to the same principle. When you beg, you lose power. When you lead yourself, you gain it. Opportunities, respect, and success follow those who carry themselves with certainty. Just as a woman is drawn to strength, so too is the world. When you embody self-respect, doors open, people listen, and value flows back to you. Do not underestimate the ripple effect of this transformation. When you stop begging, you stop radiating weakness. When you raise your standards, you stop tolerating mediocrity. When you withdraw your energy, you stop wasting time on those who do not value you. These choices sharpen you, mold you, and position you for a life where you are no longer chasing interest but attracting it naturally, in love, in business, in friendships, in every sphere of life. But remember this: choosing strength requires courage. It is easy to beg, it is easy to chase, it is easy to lower your standards just to keep someone close. But easy choices lead to hard lives. Hard choices, however, the choice to walk away, the choice to be silent, the choice to grow, the choice to uphold self-respect. Those choices lead to powerful lives. And powerful lives reignite attraction without effort. So the challenge stands before you now. Will you continue repeating the cycle of weakness, or will you step into a new identity, one defined by presence, discipline, and unshakable standards? Will you keep giving your power away, or will you reclaim it once and for all? The answer determines not only whether you regain her interest, but also whether you regain yourself. Because the truth is, this was never about her. It was always about you. The moment you choose strength over desperation, you do not just regain her attention, you regain your own power. And once you have that power, you become unstoppable.